Of course, I have to certainly thank Prince Gajendra Babu for making this happen, because for quite some time we have been planning to meet, and it has been materialized. And since we are almost towards the end, a lot of ideas are floating in this room from the beginning. Anil spoke about many of the aspects related to the constitutional dimension of the education policy, and several speakers have come and talked about many of the items, so therefore I don't really have a lot of points to talk about, but I would still want to touch upon some of the things which may not have been mentioned sufficiently, and also would like to use certain other examples to talk about exactly where some of the problems that I think are not addressed by the so-called national exclusion policy. I mean, of course, that is what we think, but this particular policy has missed out on several things. It's actually a missed opportunity. In actual sense, many of us have participated in these deliberations when the policy was actually in the process. And in the process, some interesting thing actually happened. That it is in that sense that this is also an exclusion policy, because many of the ideas that we have put together in that policy also been excluded. You can't hear properly? I'm sorry. Is it better? Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't make out. Okay, so what I was saying was that there is another sense in which this policy is also excluded, because several of us who also participated in the deliberations while the policy was in the making, and many of those ideas are also been excluded. So that is what I wanted to say. You see, so it is in a double sense that this policy is not an inclusive policy. So I wanted to start, I wanted to make only 4 points. The first point that I wanted to talk about is by actually give you an example, and through that example I wanted to talk about some kind of a reality check. So the first point is about where are we today in in either higher education or in education as such. I mean, since we are largely discussing higher education, I would specifically talk about higher education. Where are we in this country, or in comparison with the other countries? How are we placed? Of course, there are very easy to find out, because all that you have to do is go to the internet and ask for the top 100 universities, or top 200 universities, or top 1000 universities. And if you go to 100, you won't find a single institute. You will go to the top 200, then you will find maybe 1 or 2 of them. And then you go to top 1000, maybe you will find 5-6 of them. So that is where we are. Well, whatever be the kind of criteria that people are using, it doesn't matter, because that sort of gives you some kind of an indication of where we are. I'm not actually saying that the criteria that they have used is accurate, but they have certainly used one important criteria, or 2 important criteria in that, and one of them is how productive are these higher education institutes. How creative these productive institutes have been. And that is certainly judged on the basis of the kind of innovations that they have done, and the kind of investigations that they do, and the kind of experimental explorations that they have done. And based on that, of course, they will use all kinds of statistical methods to arrive at that kind of rating, but then they are largely measuring that particular aspect. And what does that tell us? Of course, that Indian higher education institutes largely have failed in creating knowledge, constructing knowledge, and also, of course, not just knowledge construction of model building or scientific knowledge or something like that, but also in terms of even innovations, whether it comes to technology or whatever. But of course, we all know very well that we produce a large number of graduates, I mean, in terms of number of graduates that we produce, we are always on the top. But still, where are they going? They are largely participating in some kind of clerical or managerial kind of positions all over the place, and they are not actually able to generate sufficient abilities to come out with knowledge systems or knowledge productions which can be called as really innovative, or which would be consumed by the other people. That is another important way of understanding. I'm sorry to simplify this dialogue, but it's like production versus consumption. Of course, it is a very simplified model, but it gives you an indication to let you think about this whole problem. So India has been largely a consumer as far as the higher education aspects are concerned, and in many other aspects also we have been consumers, but at least in higher education we are consumers. Let us look at another important data. All of you can actually test this today evening when you go back and open your computers or mobiles and ask this question. So go to, let us say, the very interesting and very popular site called the Wikipedia. Everybody knows about Wikipedia, right? So when you go to Wikipedia and search for the following kind of understanding. How many languages are represented on Wikipedia? Almost every language in the world is represented. And now naturally the question arises, how many articles do you have in any given language on Wikipedia? And you will see some interesting indicators there. Of course, English is certainly one of the largest represented language. And before I talk about the numbers, I wanted to tell why I am choosing Wikipedia. It's just some kind of my justification. I'm choosing Wikipedia first of all because it is not produced by a company or a country. It is produced by people, like all of us. All of us can actually produce. I'm sure maybe some of you could also be the editors of Wikipedia as well. And if you have not done that, please go ahead and take an account and start editing Wikipedia, because you are a producer of knowledge, and therefore you can express on Wikipedia as much as you want. The most important reason why I chose Wikipedia is because Wikipedia actually gives you an accurate representation about higher education accessibility in any given language. So you can easily find out which country actually does higher education in their language. Okay, so the top 10 or 15 countries that you will see where they have produced more than 1 million pages in their own languages. That means how many pages are there? See, the numbers appear very simplistic, but it may appear to be like that. But you'll get to see the point as I give you a little more about this example. So English certainly is on the top, but other than English, that you have Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Persian, Arabic, and you also have many of the European languages, like it could be French, German, Italian, and even Portuguese. So all these languages have more than 1 million pages on the internet. And most of these pages are actually the digest of human language, not at a primary school level, not at a lower level of simple common sense knowledge, but of higher education knowledge. It's a digest of higher education knowledge. So what is the knowledge that is produced by people, and people are digesting that knowledge? That is another interesting aspect about it. The term that is used always is Creative Commons. It's a reflection of the Creative Commons. And also because it's a knowledge that is shared, produced by people, shared by people, and also it's a clear sense of democracy being represented in that production of knowledge system. Now, what about the Indian languages? And that gives you an idea about how, whether production versus consumption kind of thing. Now, if you look at the Indian languages, there are only 4 Indian languages that certainly do not have any million pages. There are only more than 100,000 pages I'm talking about more than 100,000 pages are created in only 4 Indian languages on Wikipedia. Which are they? Bangla, Tamil, Malayalam and Urdu. And as you know, Bangla is spoken not only in India but also in Bangladesh. And similarly, Tamil is also spoken in not only in India but also in Lanka and other South Asian countries. And so you know about Urdu, for example, is spoken both in India as well as in Pakistan. Okay, and Malayalam, of course, is also spoken in the country, and Bangla is also the case. So these are the examples. And Hindi, of course, also is one of the languages that is sufficiently represented, which means that 100,000 is what we're talking about. So, as I said, there is an interesting correlation here in the sense that if you are teaching and learning higher education in that language, you will be above 1 million pages on Wikipedia automatically. It's a kind of a rough statistical correlation. It may be simplistic, but then you can contest me on that. But that is the point of what research and exploration, and you derive this kind of conclusions. One may go wrong, but here is a point that what I am trying to prove is that for all these 70 years or even otherwise, Indian education system has failed to produce us as producers of knowledge, and it is clearly getting reflected there. It's not necessarily in English, but in any other language whatsoever. So that point is also being made. There is one more important point that I also want to make here is the aspect about when people in India created knowledge and expressed very difficult ideas, what is the language that they have used to express them? Take for example, Mahatma Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj, and he wrote in Gujarati. And while he was traveling to South Africa, he had a long time to spend in the ship, because those days he was going on the ship from Mumbai to South Africa, and he had time, and that is where he actually wrote Hind Swaraj. It was later on translated by him in an Indian language. That's another part of the story, of course, because he is capable of expressing in both the languages. He is quite competent in both the languages. And so is the case with Guruji Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote Gitanjali in Bangla. And so is the case with Subramanya Bharati, who wrote in Tamil. Very difficult ideas and very interesting ideas, and they all wrote in their own language, and they were able to express their things. And I speak, my mother tongue is Telugu, so I know Sri Sri, for example, who wrote in a very similar spirit like Subramanya Bharati, and he also wrote in Telugu. Very difficult and challenging ideas to inspire people. And so, why am I telling about all these things is because we have to understand one important aspect. I am trying to bring in a kind of a distinction, saying that the NEP 2020 talks about medium of instruction. Okay, so that is the term that is used. Of course, a large number of educational philosophers, educational things, people keep talking about educational, medium of instruction. But I want you to think in terms of medium of expression instead. Because that is, I think, a very important aspect. Because why am I talking about this? Because I already mentioned to you about Korea, Japan, France, and all these places where higher education is actually done in their medium of expression. Remember, that is the important point. That in Germany, the German language is the medium of expression in higher education institutes. So is the case with Japan, France, Korea, China, whatever examples you take, and none of them are left out. The arguments that are given nowadays is that no, if you don't do English, you won't be able to go to conferences and present your papers, you won't be able to publish them and all that. But in all these universities in all these countries actually have a special department which helps them to publish papers in English. Why? Because they say that go ahead and express yourself first, because expression is most important. First express yourself first, get your statement out, sentences come later. And this is an important subtle distinction that I learned while doing philosophy, that there is a difference between a sentence and a statement. Statement is what you express. You have a meaning, and it is either true or false. But then, on the other hand, when it comes to sentences, they are restricted to the grammar of each of the languages. So the grammar of each language is so different and arbitrary. But when it comes to whether you have something to say, then you talk about expression. So this is the important point that I wanted to say, is that, and first of all, the point is that India has failed to produce producers of knowledge and even innovators when it comes to technology or whatever. Occasional here and there examples one can always have, because there are always isolated cases of success. And the second important point is that Indian education system did not promote the medium of expression. They only talked about medium of instruction, which again NEP 2020 also again does the same thing. They talk about home language. The home language is essentially not the same as the kind of Marathi that you would speak or the kind of Hindi that you would speak. So they would call something like Bhojpuri as a home language, Bundelkhandi as a home language, or some kind of a version of Telugu or Tamil as a kind of a home language, because that is not the kind of language that you will find in the textbooks. Now, at the moment they're only talking about use the home language as a medium or just as a tool so that you learn the other language. But they're actually not promoting that as the medium of expression. I think this is one of the major problems, which I think is something that we need to attend to and try to exactly find out this subtle distinction between medium of instruction and medium of expression. In all those countries where you see excellent higher education happening in their own languages, you will see that there is no such thing as medium of instruction. They have only one thing called medium of expression. Okay, so this is the subtle aspect about these things. And then in India, if you really want to bring out this medium of expression in our own languages, one possibility could be that in print medium you do have a lot of higher education in Tamil, Malayalam, as well as in other languages. But however, it has not appeared as yet in the digital format. So there is a very important task that all of us have to transform those printed higher education material, good quality technical language materials available in print, but we have to now transform them into digital medium. And it's a task that we have to take. And in fact, I took up one such task of putting together all the work that Anil Sadgopal and Kishore Bharati has done, and we wanted to put that in the front of the digital medium. And of course, each of you can do that in your own way. That is very important because a lot of technical information Anil has written in Hindi. Much of it is not even available in English. First of all, it should be available to people at large, and it should be expressed at large. And that kind of a project that each of us can actually take up to bridge this kind of a gap. So now let me come to two other points, and then I will close my this thing. So I will try to make these two other points in as short as possible, so that we have time for the other speakers as well. So this point, of course, I have the paper is already available to you. I would maybe skip the third point, which is about the entrance examinations and things like that, about which a lot of things are already being talked about. So there may be a couple of small minor points which I may have added, which possibly you can get them through the paper that is already in your hand. So let me come to the last point of the thing, which is all about the kind of the mandate of the higher education institutes. If you start looking at the mandate of the higher education institutes, and one of the important mandate is explore and experiment. Higher education institutes are supposed to explore and experiment. Now, not only in their languages, in the various aspects, like for example physics, chemistry, biology, technology, or whatever. We can't exclude, for example, experiments related to social welfare, experiments related to education, experiments related to various other kinds of aspects of life, whether it is environmental aspects, whether it is aspects related to food security or whatever. In every respect we have to do experiments, and that is what the higher education institutes are expected to do. So here I wanted to talk about one important missing aspect in NEP 2020. NEP 2020 doesn't ask you to conduct any experiments in education. We have here with us Anil Sadgopal, who did arguably one of the largest experiment in science education called HSTP, Hoshangabad Science Teaching Program. It went on for almost from 1970 to about 82? 2002. So I'm sorry for that. So you can see that it's such a long experiment. And now tell me one thing, you read NEP 2020 and tell me, is there any scope for any educationist to do an experiment like that? Of course, I'm not saying that that happened only because some policy actually facilitated him to do that. He took the liberty of a professor who knows how to do research, who knows how to conduct a social experiment. He went to a village, leaving a nice scientist job at TIFR, and took many other people with him, young people, old people and things like that, and actually sought simple financial help, but then took the community help in that village and actually did that experiment. I'm not saying that Anil is the only one who did that experiment. I know in Maharashtra, Kalbag did that experiment in Pabal, Vigyan Ashram. And in fact, something interesting to talk about Kapal, this thing is because today, there is a lot of talk about maker spaces and all that all over the world. Not only in India. The tinkering spaces and maker spaces have been talked about both by NEP as well as by the Planning Commission. So of course, that's not the word to use now, Niti Ayog. And many other places where, but this particular idea actually germinated in India by Kalbag. And people from MIT came to visit Vigyan Ashram, and then they conceptualized what is called Fab Labs. So the Fab Lab concept, which is internationally well known, which has also been translated by some other people as maker spaces, actually originated in another experiment which Kalbag did in Maharashtra. I'm not saying these are the only two people. There are many such experiments like that. Nahi Talim experiments were there for quite some time. We know the Fules have done a lot of interesting experiments even before we became independent. And so is the case with Guruji. Shantiniketan is an interesting experiment. And so is the case with certain other kinds of allied schools like Jittu Krishnamurti schools as well as experiments. There are many other such experiments out there. Now, education, as many people have already mentioned, is such a core idea of human life. And we can't go on doing any such experiments. How can a policy of national scale cannot even say that, all these departments of education, all the universities are actually expected to do many more experiments, because we don't know. Maybe Anil has done a problem. And if you make Anil's idea as a national idea, I would say it's a disaster. It will be a disaster. Because you can't implement what worked in Hoshangabad, in Kerala, or in Tamil Nadu, or in Nagaland, or in some other place. Every region has their own problems, and we have to localize those problems, and the policies have to be made, tuned to what is required in that place. I'm very happy, of course, that Tamil Nadu government is actually already coming out with a policy of a regional kind. But again, I would put the same warning to that state. Tamil Nadu is a large state. So again, if you talk about one policy for the entire state, which is as big as many of the countries in the world, again that would be a mistake. Because there are a large number of problems out there. And for that, of course, the Constitution already gave us the model. Because decentralize, distribute the administration. What does it mean? It means even the policies have to be done at the panchayat level. Policies also have to be done at the district level or at a state level, depending on how and what issue are you talking about. There are some issues which can be addressed at the panchayat level. Some issues have to be addressed at the state level. Some issues certainly have to be addressed at the national level when it comes to, for example, providing equal opportunities for everyone, providing resources for all these experiments that we wanted to do. So this is another important aspect where NEP 2020 doesn't do sufficient justice. Let me now come to the last point that I wanted to talk about, which also I think is a very important point. which is, if you really want to understand about the danger of centralization, not only in education, in every department of our life, centralization is a bad idea, period, of anything, whatever it is. Even if it is, for example, military, centralization is very bad. People know about it because they don't want to put all the eggs in one basket and then fight from one place. They will actually distribute the army in multiple pockets and actually take care of the security. And I'm not just trying to use a wrong metaphor here for in the case of education. So here what is actually happening is, think about 3 different kinds of networks. So there is one network where everybody is connected to that particular place. So which essentially would mean that if I want to connect to you, all that I have to do is I will hop to that center and then come to you. So it appears very simple, because if I want to, for example, contact Anil, or I want to contact Jam or someone, all that I have to do is I have to go to that center, let's say a server or something like that, and then I send a message and then it goes to them immediately. Now what is the problem with that vulnerability? The problem with that vulnerability is that if I have a fake news to spread, just imagine, because anybody is a potential fake news spreader, because each of us are thinking creatively, and as a result of which there is a possibility that every creative idea can't be good. It could be a wrong idea, it could be a mistake. What happens if that idea just spreads, to the whole place? That's the kind of vulnerability that we're talking about. There's a single point of failure in any kind of centralized administration or any kind of centralized model that you have. Natural organization is organic. In biology, for example, you see decentralized networks. Everything is decentralized. If you look at our body, our architecture, it's all decentralized architecture. There is no centralization anywhere. The myth that people have is that the brain is the center is wrong. It's proven sufficiently by the recent cognitive developments. Body is a sensory motor network. It's a network, first of all, and it's a distributed network. And distributed decentralized models of cognition are the ruling models nowadays. And the idea that only brain does everything is actually already been put aside by many of the scientists. Now, why am I talking about this is because during the pandemic we learned something very interesting. People asked us to isolate ourselves at homes. Now, what is the shape of that network at the time when the pandemic was on the rise? It was a decentralized, it's not even a decentralized one, it's a distributed network. A distributed network would mean that I would only have 5 neighbors around me. That means I would not be able to contact more than 5 people. In a decentralized network, of course you would hop to the richest node that is available to you, and then from there you will be able to hop. That means if you really want to go and talk to someone as far as Timbuktu, I only have to hop 5 times in order to reach there. But in a decentralized network, in a distributed network, if you want the virus from Mumbai to go to Bhopal, or Mumbai to go to Chennai or something like that, it will take a long time. And that is the reason why people have studied the properties of networks, and then the experts on disease spreading models have warned us that this is the only way how you will be able to ensure. That is why they told us to use decentralized models, because decentralized models is the when the virus spreading can be curtailed. And the reason why I am talking about this is because not because we have to do it fast, because anything that you do fast will actually be a problematic thing, because the world cannot be flat. Let us understand that. The world has to be organic, it has to be richer, it has to be diverse, and that is exactly what the lesson that we learn from anything that you learn from biology or biological diversity or about organic evolution or anything like that. The society is also very rich, and people give a lot of lessons, so many poetries, so many poems we have read about how rich is Indian country because of this diversity and things like that. Let it be diverse. Let the number of policies also be diverse. Let the number of experiments that we do about education also has to be as diverse as possible. So the point is that if you have one policy for one nation, there's a single point of failure. It's a scientific principle, and that is exactly what this policy is actually trying to do. If there is something, like let us take one idea, something like let us talk about the school complexes, or let us talk about the college university complexes that the NEP talks about. Now tell me, is there any place where you have actually done this experiment ever? Now if you haven't done this experiment, how dare you say impose it to the entire nation without any experimental sense? I'm talking about any of the other ideas. You take Sanskrit for example. Is there any evidence that Sanskrit is the best language to express ourselves? How can you impose that language on everybody? I'm just using these two examples, but you can go ahead and look at all the recommendations that are done and find out what is the evidence that they have. So it is the mandate of us who are interested about higher education. In higher education, we have to explore and experiment, not just in physics, chemistry, biology, climate change or whatever. In education as well, we have to experiment. And in fact, that is exactly what I learned from Anil Sadgopal. And that's the same thing and Anil learned from Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi's entire life is full of experiments. And I think that is one of the important things that I think we have to talk about. So NEP 2020 fails in every respect as far as I am concerned. It doesn't even address any of the problems that we have. And let us continue to speak in Tamil and express yourself in higher education. And don't use it as a medium of instruction. Please. That would be my last word. Thank you so much.